Welcome back, everyone, to the final session of Hobbit Camp 2018, presented by Signum Academy. Myself, Wesley Shantz, and Sharon Hoff here to take your questions and comments. At any time you want to send those in, you can do that in your chat, in your question box rather, and we'll take a look at what we hear from you. This is your last chance to send in questions for this year about The Hobbit, that is. So please be doing that. And particularly, I'll be looking at chapters 18 and 19. You can send in questions from other ones too. If I remember enough, I'll be able to answer them. Chapter 18, the return journey, and 19, the last stage. We're going to go back sort of to the beginning of the book. We were looking at the theme of adventure, the exploration of Bilbo's character, and looking at the ways that other characters in these chapters make a point of how much Bilbo has changed and grown, and how that comes clear in the course of his return. So we took basically 17 or 18 chapters to get to the end of the adventure, and now in 1 or 2 chapters we take the road back. And a very short couple of chapters here, but a lot to talk about. So big questions to talk about here. How has Bilbo changed? And how is that reflected in the way that people see him? Particularly Thorin and Gandalf remark on this, and so we'll look at those. Some activities. If you still have room in your journal, you can write about the last words of the dwarves and elves and wizards that we get in the book. You can add in your last pages there, draw your favorite scenes from these chapters and from throughout the book, and then you complete your journal and you finish the cover off, and it's yours, and you can keep it, and you can look back at it as you come back to this book over the years. I think it will be really fun for you to share those journals with your future self. And then if you want to send in things that you've made throughout the course of the camp, we're always really happy to see those. Suggestions for today: making posters, like sort of motivational material right here in Thorin's last words. If you want to review the adventure with your family or your group who you're watching this with, and go through some of your favorite parts of the book, that will be a great kind of summing up discussion. You can also, of course, find one of the movie versions. We recommend the animated one. I've got this version of the book here. Oh, oops. This is the one that I read as a kid, and it's got pictures. If you can see it, it's got pictures throughout it from the original Rankin Bass Hobbit movie. It's fantastic. So if you can find an old VHS player and a VHS that works, you can watch that. Or I'm sure you can find it with fresher, newer media. I guess all the kids out there are asking, what's a VHS? Sorry, don't have time to explain. Watch the movie if you get a chance. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's available on DVD. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, if you remember what DVDs are, you can find it that way too. All right. So, courage and wisdom. When Gandalf saw Bilbo, he was delighted. "Baggins!" he exclaimed. "Well, I never! After all, alive after all, I am glad. I began to wonder if even your luck would see you through. A terrible business, and it nearly was disastrous. But other news can wait. Come, you are called for." And leading the Hobbit, he took him within the tent. "Hail, Thorin," he said as he entered. "I have brought him." There indeed lay Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds, and his rent armor and notched axe were cast upon the floor. He looked up as Bilbo came beside him. "Farewell, good thief," he said. "I go now to the halls of waiting, to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver, and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back my words and deeds at the gate." Bilbo knelt on one knee, filled with sorrow. "Farewell, King under the mountain," he said. "This is a bitter adventure, if it must end so. Not a mountain of gold can amend it. Yet I am glad that I have shared in your perils. that has been more than any Baggins deserves. No, said Thorin. There is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell. And that's Thorin's final words here. He held on to life long enough for Bilbo to come back safe. They believed that Bilbo was alive somewhere, although they couldn't see him, right? And so Gandalf sent this soldier to look for him in the last place they heard his voice. It seems that the end of the battle, just as Bilbo saw before, had been terrible, but they have survived, right? Bilbo, Gandalf come in as Thorin is finally passing away to hear his final words and to, very importantly here, part on friendly terms, right? As Bilbo said and hoped and wished that they might meet again as friends after Thorin was so angry with him for giving away the Arkenstone, right? It seems that in this final moment here, Thorin has come back to his senses, his dragon sickness, his spell of the treasure has not been able to overcome his friendship and his the whole course of the rest of their adventure together, right? That he spent with Bilbo. And so it's sad, of course, that Thorin passes away, but he is himself again. And he leaves us with some very, very important words here. There's more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. So those, I think, are some words to remember, to think about, to put on a poster and put it in your room somewhere that you'll see it and remember this moment here and all this this experience of friendship that allows Thorin to say these words after all they've been through. So some courage and some wisdom, and now sorrow and joy. So then Bilbo turned away, and he went by himself and sat alone, wrapped in a blanket. And whether you believe it or not, he wept until his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. He was a kindly little soul. Indeed, it was long before he had the heart to make a joke again. A mercy it is, he said at last to himself, that I woke up when I did. I wish Thorin were living, but I am glad that we parted in kindness. You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins, and you made a great mess of that business with the stone. And there was a battle in spite of all your efforts to buy peace and quiet, but I suppose you can hardly be blamed for that. All that had happened after he was stunned, Bilbo learned later, but it gave him more sorrow than joy. And he was now weary of his adventure. He was aching in his bones for the homeward journey. That, however, was a little delayed. So in the meantime, I will tell you something of events. The narrator goes on, explains more of how the battle ended up with once the eagles had flown in and Bilbo was knocked on the head and couldn't watch the rest. So if you found parts of that end of the battle that you're real interested in, you can type those in and I can comment on those a bit. But I was going to focus here on this idea that Bilbo feels more sorrow than joy as he hears from Gandalf and the others what happened after he was stunned, after he went unconscious there. So they won the battle, right? This was a great victory for the good guys, and yet Bilbo is sad. So why is that? Why is that his reaction to what should be good news, right? Well, I think we've got to look again at the whole situation here, where Bilbo has just lost his friend, his companion on this adventure, who he tried so hard to save, right? He did what he thought was best, taking the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone, the thing Thorin valued the most. He took it and gave it away, even though it made Thorin so angry at him. He did that to try to avoid the battle, and he failed, and Thorin died. And so Bilbo, he really is hard on himself here, calls himself a fool, right, for failing to prevent the battle. But then he eases up, which is good, and realizes that he couldn't have prevented it, right? He did everything he could, and perhaps he's remembering already Thorin's last words, right? That there is a lot of good in him, that he doesn't need to be so hard on himself when he tried his best. And after all, as we've seen time and again throughout the story, right? People who are called foolish, right, often do have a good deal of wisdom. Okay, so he's in good company after all. A mercy that he woke up when he did. There's another, just a really small one, but another example of some good luck, right? What you might call good luck, him waking up just in time to hear Thorin's last words before he died. Well, he calls it a mercy, and that's rather interesting. So we will hear a bit more about luck and how it relates to these kinds of themes a little bit more before the end of the story here. Okay, so I'm not seeing any comments imploring us to delve into the end of the battle. All right, we'll go ahead and look at the treasure then. All right, so they bury Thorin and Fili and Kili, who also died, with great ceremony. They lay the Arkenstone on his breast and the sword, or Christ, right? And then they remark, even a 14th share was wealth exceedingly great, greater than that of many mortal kings. From that treasure Bard sent much gold to the master of Lake Town, and he rewarded his followers and friends freely. To the Elven king he gave the emeralds of Girion, such jewels as he most loved, which Dane had restored to him. So Dane gives treasure to Bard, right, as was agreed before Thorin died, in exchange for the Arkenstone. Bard gives treasures to the Elven king, to the Lake Town, the people of Lake Town, to help them out. To Bilbo he said, "This treasure is as much yours as it is mine. The old agreements cannot stand, since so many have a claim in its winning and defense. Yet even though you were willing to lay aside all your claim, I should wish that the words of Thorin, of which you repented, should not prove true, that we should give you little. No, I reward you most richly of all." "Very kind of you," said Bilbo, "but really it is a relief to me. How on earth should I have got all that treasure home without war and murder all along the way? I don't know, and I don't know what I should have done with it when I got home. I am sure it is better in your hands." In the end he would only take 2 small chests, one filled with silver and the other with gold, such as one strong pony could carry. "That will be quite as much as I can manage," said he. Right. So Thorin's curse, right, seems to be released here. It's not going to be true that Bilbo gets no reward, right? Bilbo accepts at least a small reward. But even if it was true that he got nothing, it sounds like he would be okay with that, right? Treasure brings war and murder, people trying to steal it from you. He knows this from experience, so he'd really rather not deal with the problems. But on the other hand, he really deserves some kind of reward for all that he's done, right? And so he does in the end accept a little bit what he can carry, what one strong pony can carry, silver and gold. So we see here that the proper thing to do with treasure, of course, not to hoard it, not to wait until dragons come and take it away, but to give it freely to those who are deserving, to those who are in need, to those who can appreciate and love it, right, and make good use of it. That seems to be what we are supposed to do with our treasures, and to accept it when you deserve something good. Take it home with you, even if you don't know how you're going to use it, right? We've seen all along, connecting with the idea of treasure is the idea of that wisdom that Bilbo is said to have, right? He certainly has gained a little bit of silver and a little of gold, and a great deal of new knowledge of all these stories of his adventures, of how to be in the presence of people like Bard and the Elven King, right? To be a leader. That's how to deal with treasure. Okay. At last, the time came for him to say goodbye to his friends. "Farewell, Balin," he said. Farewell, Dwalin. Farewell, Dory and Nori and Ori and Oin, Gloin, Biffer, Boffer, and Bomber. May your beards never grow thin. And turning toward the mountain, he added, Farewell, Thorin, Oakenshield, and Feely, and Keely. May your memory never fade. Then the dwarves bowed low before their gate, but words stuck in their throats. Goodbye and good luck wherever you fare, said Balin at last. If ever you visit us again, when our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid. If you're ever passing my way, said Bilbo, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time. And then he turned away. So one more time here, we see how words fail. It was impossible to describe the beauty of the treasure when Bilbo first saw it, right? They were speechless. Thorin, when he saw the Arkenstone, right? There's certain things that leave people without the ability to speak. And one of those things, of course, is saying goodbye to your friends. So the words that they say to one another, again, have something like politeness about them, right? They've always been so polite, at your service, right? Good morning, all these little greetings that we saw in the very beginning of the book. Here they promise to host one another again with great hospitality if they ever meet again. It seems like the ability to open their halls to one another again should remind us of that very first meeting when Bilbo didn't know what was going on and all the dwarves kept coming to his door, right? How different now, if they ever come, how happy he'll be to see them, right? So there's one interesting little example of how he is so changed, right? He's adventurous, he's used to being around these people and leading them even, and yet he's the same, right? He's the same hospitable little hobbit, right? Very polite, come on in for tea or anytime, right? So he's broken from his strict timetable for their sake. So we say farewell one last time to Thorin, Feely, and Keely. May your memory never fade, right? And what does that mean? How do you keep the memory of people alive? That's kind of an interesting question to think about here, because of course that's one of the big things that Bilbo has gained on the adventure. He's gained all these memories. Okay, but how does he preserve them? How does he keep them alive, and how does he share them? That'll be something interesting to watch for. Okay. So goodbye to the dwarves. Now saying goodbye to the elves. Oh, sorry, I missed a little quote mark here. I beg of you, said Bilbo, stammering and standing on one foot, to accept this gift. And he brought out a necklace of silver and pearls that Dane had given him at their parting. In what way have I earned such a gift, O Hobbit? Said the king. Well, I thought, don't you know, said Bilbo, rather confused, that some little return should be made to you for your hospitality. I mean, even a burglar has his feelings. I have drunk much of your wine and eaten much of your bread. I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent, said the king gravely, and I name you elf friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less, for stealing would be too easy. Farewell. Then the elves turned toward the forest, and Bilbo started on his long road home. So he received gifts from Bard and from Dane, and now Bilbo is giving out the gifts again to the Elven King. And he has a sort of embarrassing reason that he feels like he should give a gift to the Elven King for all of his hospitality, right? And again, the Elven King didn't realize he was giving Bilbo hospitality, and the hospitality that he was giving to the dwarves was to have them in prison, right? So there's a lot of awkwardness here. It seems like when people are awkward in this book, they stand on one foot. I guess they're sort of digging their toe into the ground with the other one or something like that, right? I don't know what you guys do when you're feeling awkward, but it's certainly hard to get words out then too, right? So when you're deeply moved, in deep wonder of something, or when you're feeling like you just don't know how to say something, then it's tough to get your words out. But he does finally explain, and the Elven King seems to understand, right? Um, the Elven King, in return for this gift or payment, however you want to look at it, the Elven King names Bilbo Elf Friend and Blessed. It's not like this is gonna replace Bilbo's name, right? He's been called lots of things throughout the story. He gave himself a lot of names when talking to Smaug, remember? Um, and all of those seem to sort of just add on to who Bilbo is. Uh, he's still Bilbo Baggins, but now he's also Bilbo the Magnificent, Elf Friend, and Blessed. Um, what might that mean? This is something that does seem to have an effect on him. Um, I don't know that his shadow literally never grows less, um, but what that might mean, right, is that uh, he remains in the in the care of or in the thoughts of the elves. And if anyone has got long memories, it's the elves, right? So Bilbo will not be forgotten. Um, in the sense, uh, his shadow growing less would mean um, that what would that mean exactly? Is that the sun going down and darkness falling, or the sun being directly overhead? I'm not entirely sure. Again, literally what that's supposed to mean, but it seems to be something like um, you'll remain in the light of the elves' attention, their care. Yeah, something like that. Uh, or stealing would be too easy, right? So again, a little bit of humor there about the time when the elves did not or were not aware of Bilbo. Well, that they won't fall for that again, right? They're going to watch out for him and take care of him. Um, so he heads home. He travels with Gandalf and Beorn. It's kind of interesting. Instead of going through the forest, they go all the way around. I'm told that they have many adventures, uh, and they reach Beorn's house in time to celebrate the midwinter Yule, right, the holidays, with some friends. And so that's nice. Then it's time to go, right? It was spring. I should say before that, yeah. Um, the outcome of this battle, we shouldn't forget. They weren't expecting the battle, right? And when it came, it was terrible, obviously, um, awful thing. But the outcome is positive, right? There will be peace um, in the north for a long time. Now that Dane is the king under the mountain, he's giving treasure away. Their peace is restored. The dragon sickness is gone. The dragon's dead. Uh, there's companionship between the humans, the elves, the dwarves, um, and Beorn's people. Beorn personally brings down the Goblin King Bolg, right, the heir of the Great Goblin, who was killed in a previous war. So all of the Goblin leaders are now gone. It seems they've been scattered, and Beorn's people are going to rise. They're going to settle that area west of the forest. Beorn is going to have a long line of descendants who are also powerful, strong leaders, although not all are as kind even as Beorn. We know Beorn can be pretty harsh. Okay, so the outcome of the battle is it sounds like things are going to be much more peaceful in the future. And so it was spring, and a fair one, with mild weathers and bright sun, before Bilbo and Gandalf took their leave at last of Beorn, and though he longed for home, Bilbo left with regret, for the flowers of the gardens of Beorn were in springtime no less marvellous than in high summer. At last they came up the long road and reached the very pass where the goblins had captured them before. But they came to that high point at morning, and looking backward, they saw a white sun shining over the outstretched lands. There behind lay Mirkwood, blue in the distance, and darkly green at the nearer edge even in the spring. There far away was the lonely mountain on the edge of eyesight. On its highest peak, snow yet unmelted was gleaming pale. So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending, said Bilbo, and he turned his back on his adventure. The Tookish part was getting very tired, and the Baggins was daily getting stronger. I wish now only to be in my own armchair, he said. We heard Bilbo's proverbs throughout the story. This seems like one more proverb about dragons, right? Um, he mentioned before that you shouldn't laugh at a live dragon, right? And his father says that even every worm has its weak point. So there's some sayings that go along with dragons, and it seems like this one goes with those two. So snow comes after fire, and even dragons have their ending. All right. So the vision that he gets here of seeing all the way across the wood and unto the lonely mountain, it's a little bit like we saw him before turn back west and looking over the forest to the misty mountains and imagining his home on the hill beyond them. Uh, so now Bilbo's perspective, his ability to sort of see both sides of things, seems to have really grown. Um, this idea that even when things are looking their worst, the fire, right, the dragon, those things too will come to an end. And then there's snow. There's this brilliant light which can be seen from far, far away, right, to show that things have become peaceful again, that things have their sort of their cycles of the seasons, for example, right? It's spring again. They've gone through the whole year at this point. So just like the seasons come full circle, now we have Bilbo almost home again. The Tookish part getting very tired. Well, it's done a lot, right? He found more Tookishness than he knew that he had throughout the adventure, and now it's getting tired. The Baggins is getting stronger. He wishes to be in his own armchair, as he's wished over and over again to be back with the kettle, the tea, right? Back with the eggs and bacon, all of this. In the past, those have been things that he wishes when he's in great danger. Now it's simply looking forward to it, right? To being back home, right? The Tookish part is tired, so what better place to rest than Rivendell? All right, so this is coming into the very last chapter here. The elves again sing to him. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Though sword shall be rusted, and throne and crown perish, with strength that men trusted and wealth that they cherish, here grass is still growing, and leaves are yet swinging, the white water flowing, and elves are yet singing, come, tra-la-la-lolly, come back to the valley. The stars are far brighter than gems without measure, the moon is far whiter than silver and treasure, the fire is more shining on hearth in the gloaming than gold won by mining. So why go a-roaming? Oh, tra-la-la-lolly, come back to the valley. Oh, where are you going so late in returning? The river is flowing, the stars are all burning. Oh, whither so laden, so sad and so dreary? Here elf and elf maiden, now welcome the weary, with tra-la-la-lolly, come back to the valley. Tra-la-la-lolly, fa-la-la-lolly, fa-la. So we're told by the narrator, their song is something like this, and I'm sure you can sing it better than that if you practice a little bit and you get in the swing of the elf songs. It sounds a lot like the first song, right? Some of the words, or not words, but like the song syllables here, tra la la lolly, are just the same. But the song is about something a little different this time, right? When we first met them, the elves were singing about the journey that the dwarves and Bilbo were on, right? Now they are singing about the events that have happened. And there's a little more too, right? The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled. Okay. The sword shall be rusted, throne and crown perish. So these things, both the dragon, so the evil things that don't use treasure well, and the good things, the swords and thrones of the warriors like Bard, and Dain and Thorin, those too are going to perish, we're told, and be rusted. So not only will dragons, right? What does Bilbo say? After the fire, after the dragon, there's snow, right? So there's that kind of passage of time idea. But not only that, time passes for the good guys too, the heroes, the thieves, the dwarves, and everyone. So what do the elves say about this? They say here, right? For though all that is true, here grass is still growing, and leaves are yet swinging. The white water flowing, and elves are yet singing. So Bilbo is an elf friend. Um, Even before he was named an elf friend, it seemed like the elves were quite amused by him. They liked to sing to him. What does that mean? Here's another clue, right? That where elves are, the grass is still growing. The leaves on the trees, they blow in the wind, right? The water flows. So all of these life-giving elements of the earth and the wind and the water, these things are going on just like the elves are singing. Um, the the earth, but also the sky, the stars, the moon, right? They have more beauty than the gems and silver and gold, right? That the dwarves, Bilbo went after on their adventure, that the dragon had stolen to start the whole process off, right? All those things that you work so hard to gain, right? By mining them, by fighting for them, the gold, silver, gems, they are not as beautiful as the stars and the moon, right? The fire in the hearth. That thing that Bilbo has longed for since the start of the adventure, right? Simple um, uh, elements of life that Bilbo can appreciate, and that Thorin finally appreciated at the end, and he praised Bilbo for knowing that they were more valuable than gold, right? That seems to be the message here too. The elves say, so why go a roaming? So why go on adventures, right? If you can just appreciate the beauty of stars and moon. Okay, there's something to that, right? The elves are surely very wise, even though they sound sort of foolish. And they ask, why are you so sad, right? Why are you so late in returning? It seems like what the elves don't have, and this is just my thought about this, the elves, like we saw before, they don't go along on the adventure. Um, Elrond and the elves stay in the valley. Um, we're told that they are wiser than the elves in Mirkwood, who do go and fight and take part in the battle, right? But for Bilbo, um, for him to embrace both sides of his character, the Took and the Baggins, for those things to be blended, like Thorin talks about, his courage and his wisdom, it seems like he has to go on the adventure. I think that's part of why Gandalf chose him, right? Elves can stay in their valleys, but people like Bilbo, people, uh, the hobbits, dwarves, um, mortal men, it seems like, and even some elves do have to go out on adventures in order to gain this kind of wisdom. Uh, that seems to be part of the message of the song here. The elves ask him these questions, right? Why are you so sad? Um, well, it's part of his adventure. It's part of how he is able to now really appreciate the stars, the moon, and his home, the fire on the hearth, right? Uh, those two things for Bilbo go together. Uh, and so we finally hear about where Gandalf has been this whole time on his own adventure. It was in this way that he learned where Gandalf had been to, for he overheard the words of the wizard to Elrond. It appeared that Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of lore and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. Ere long now, Gandalf was saying, the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed from that horror for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish he were banished from the world. It would be well indeed, said Elrond, but I fear that will not come about in this age of the world, or for many after. When the tale of their journeyings was told, there were other tales, and yet more tales, tales of long ago, and tales of new things, and tales of no time at all, till Bilbo's head fell forward on his chest, and he snored comfortably in a corner. So there's only so much that we can pack into the book, right? This is, again, a story about Bilbo, not about Gandalf, not about the elves and all of that they've been doing. Tolkien writes more about that in other places, but in this book, we just get a little hint of it, right? We get that hint about Beorn's whole story. We get this hint about Gandalf and some other wizards, apparently, masters of good magic and lore, like learning, knowledge, right? That drove the necromancer away, but couldn't completely defeat him, right? We just get a little bit of that story here, and there's sort of this cliffhanger, right? I fear that will not come about in this age of the world. So if you're interested in these stories, they are elaborated further in The Lord of the Rings. So if you're looking for more good books to read, highly recommend going on and reading the rest of the series that Tolkien ends up writing. There's more beyond that too. There's lots about this, and yet more tales. In some way, much of the fantasy that has become really popular, maybe books that you know about. I don't know what's popular these days. The Warriors series, right? Like Percy Jackson, Harry Potter. Maybe you've heard of these ones. We're offering camps, of course, on A Wrinkle in Time, on the Narnia books, the first one at least, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the Harry Potter camp is going on now. All of these books which have come out since Tolkien was writing this, The Hobbit, right, are in some sense more of these tales, right? More of these fantastic stories. And the more tales that you hear and read, maybe you'd like to write your own someday, right? This is a great way to continue the adventure, to keep the memory of these good things, food and cheer, right? And maybe this conflict between everyday things and adventurous things, right? The way to figure out how to deal with that, one way at least, is by telling these stories. So again, keep on reading, keep on digging in and writing your own stories. And if you like these kind of things, I recommend more of the Signum camps that are going on. Check them out. Yeah, there's yet more tales. If you're like Bilbo, though, at a certain point you get tired, right? The Tookish part gets tired. He falls asleep. He woke to find himself in a white bed, and the moon shining through an open window. Below it, many elves were singing loud and clear on the banks of the stream. Sing all ye joyful, now sing all together. The wind's in the treetop, the wind's in the heather. Stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower, and bright are the windows of night in her tower. And the song goes on. Well, merry people, said Bilbo, looking out. What time by the moon is this? Your lullaby would waken a drunken goblin, yet I thank you. And your snores would waken a stone dragon, yet we thank you, they answered with laughter. It is drawing towards dawn, and you have slept now since the night's beginning. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will be cured of weariness. A little sleep does a great cure in the house of Elrond, said he. But I will take all the cure I can get. A second good night, fair friends. And with that, he went back to bed and slept till late morning. So he calls it a lullaby. But of course, the funny thing is that they're singing it so loudly that it wakes him up in the middle of the night. So he falls asleep hearing tales, more stories. He wakes up hearing poems, right? This poem seems to be, or this song, it seems to be, again, about the beauty of nature, right? Um, and being aware of that, not only during the day, right? But also in the nighttime, when you can see the moon and the stars. Um, that seems to be something that the elves really want to remind Bilbo about, right? So again, uh, in the course of his adventure, he's seen many, many things, many dangerous things. He's experienced great hardship, but also many wonderful things. And that's sort of the idea that I get here between the day of everyday things and the night when things are a little bit spooky, a little bit marvelous, but in a way that you can relate to, I think. Um, I don't know if you've ever played like hide and seek in the dark, or if you've ever gone camping, right, and camped out under the stars. These are little things that seem to be hinted at um, in the adventure here. Um, to really appreciate those things by reading these stories, by looking carefully at Bilbo's experience, right? Even though they wake him up, he thanks them, right, for this bit of wisdom. But then he goes back to sleep. He needs to recover. He's worn out by his adventures. Um, his Tookside is tired. He needs to get the balance back, right? So he sleeps. And they come to the last road. So even as they left the valley, the sky darkened in the west before them, and wind and rain came up to meet them. Merry is Maytime, said Bilbo, as the rain beat into his face. But our back is to legends, and we are coming home. I suppose this is the first taste of it. There is a long road yet, said Gandalf. But it is the last road, said Bilbo. They go on their way. Not far from the road they found the gold of the trolls, which they had buried, still hidden and untouched. I have enough to last me my time, said Bilbo, when they had dug it up. You had better take this, Gandalf. I dare say you can find a use for it. Indeed I can, said the wizard, but share and share alike. You may find you have more needs than you expect. So this is something you might have forgotten from way back in chapter 2 and 3 when they passed this way before. They gained those swords and they buried the rest of the gold of the trolls, right? So now they dig it up again, and Bilbo again tries to say that he doesn't need it, and Gandalf this time uh, reminds him he might not know how much he'll need, right? Um, that seems like a pretty strong hint that there is more to this story, right? That we haven't heard the end of it, um, and if all he wants to do is to give it away, well, then he can do that, right? But that'll be for Bilbo to decide. He can't give up the responsibility of dealing out the treasures that he's gained on this journey, right? Um, it's a little funny too that as they come back to their home, or Bilbo's home, as he's coming back to his home, the weather turns foul, right? It's rainy, the wind comes up. Um, Again, just like was happening when they were passing through this part of the journey before. Uh, and so they went and they found the trolls in the first place, right? Looking for the fire. Okay, so we hear how we're coming to the end of the road, right? As all things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when they were in sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and of the trees were all as well known to him as his hands and toes. Coming to a rise, he could see his own hill in the distance, and he stopped suddenly and said, Roads go ever, ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow and by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever, ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wandering have gone turned at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they have long known. They long have known, sorry. Gandalf looked at him. My dear Bilbo, he said, something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were. So, of all the wonderful things on the adventure, and I'm sure the wizard has seen many that we don't even hear about, right? He looks at Bilbo and is surprised. It's more than he even expected. Not only that Bilbo's gone on this whole adventure, but that he really seems to have gained some kind of ability here to share that experience, right? That expression of all that Bilbo has seen comes out in this moment in a poem. We last saw Bilbo make up a poem when he was getting the spiders riled up in Mirkwood. So this is a very different kind of poem, right? This is a peaceful poem. I don't know quite whether to call it a happy poem exactly. It has a lot of different emotions in it, for me at least. Again, it's this combination of going on adventures, right? Seeing many wonderful things, fire and sword, so dangerous things, horrible things perhaps. But then to be able to then come back from those things, to be changed, and yet to be able to reconnect with the home, right? The place that one is from. That seems to be what Bilbo is trying to work out in this poem here. Recognizing there's always more adventures, right? The road goes ever on, right? But it can somehow lead you back home again. So that's pretty remarkable, as Gandalf recognizes. But we might remember, right? One of the first things that we hear is Bilbo describing the fireworks and how poetic he is in that moment, right? So this is something that was always in Bilbo and just needed a chance to come out, right? Now, when he comes home, bless me, what's going on? He cried. There was a great commotion, and people of all sorts, respectable and unrespectable, were thick round the door, and many were going in and out, not even wiping their feet on the map, as Bilbo noticed with annoyance. If he was surprised, they were more surprised still. He had arrived back in the middle of an auction. There was a large notice in black and red hung on the gate, stating that on June the 22nd, Messrs. Grubb, and Bruce would sell by auction the effects of the late Bilbo Baggins, Esquire of Bag End, Underhill, Hobbiton. Sale to commence at 10 o'clock sharp. It was now nearly lunchtime, and many of the things had already been sold for various prices from next to nothing to old songs, as is not unusual at auctions. Bilbo's cousins, the Sackville Bagginses, were in fact busy measuring his rooms to see if their own furniture would fit. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody that said so was sorry to find the presumption wrong. The return of Mr. Bilbo Baggins created quite a disturbance, both under the hill and over the hill, and across the water. It was a great deal more than a 9 days' wonder. The legal bother, indeed, lasted for years. It was quite a long time before Mr. Baggins was in fact admitted to be alive again. So we hear about the Sackville Bagginses, and you can see that their name, right, the sack and the bag, right, they're somehow like a reflection of Bilbo. They're trying to see if they can move into his home, and they've been selling off all of his stuff from next to nothing to old songs, right? So for nothing, essentially. All of those things in his home that Bilbo longed for and wished for so much, they're simply giving them away, essentially, right? This is a really strong example of that difference that Bilbo has now, how much he can really value these things versus all of these other hobbits who haven't had his experiences, who know nothing about what he's been through, right? are just concerned with getting it at a low price, something like that, right? So the way that they value things and the way that he values things, worlds apart, right? His is such a more wonderful level of appreciating the everyday things. And the appearance of Bilbo is like a little bit of that adventure coming into their little world here in Hobbiton. So suddenly he appears. He is alive again. They thought he was dead. They hoped that he would be, so they could take all his stuff. But some is not so. Some that said so, or sorry to find the presumption wrong, right? They some were relieved and some were sad that Bilbo came back. Is what I get from that. But how amazing, right? That someone you thought was dead turns out to be alive and home again. So what did he gain? What did he lose? Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true that forever after he remained an elf friend, and had the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed that way. But he was no longer quite respectable. He was, in fact, held by all the hobbits of the neighborhood to be queer. There's a typo there, just a quote mark, I think. Except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side. But even they were not encouraged in their friendship by their elders. And so, I'm sorry to say he did not mind. He was quite content, and the sound of the kettle on his hearth was ever after more musical than it had been even in the quiet days before the unexpected party. His sword he hung over the mantelpiece. His coat of mail was arranged on a stand in the hall until he lent it to a museum. His gold and silver was largely spent in presents, both useful and extravagant, which to a certain extent accounts for the affection of his nephews and his nieces. His magic ring he kept a great secret, for he chiefly used it when unpleasant callers came. He took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, and though many shook their heads and touched their foreheads and said, "Poor old Baggins," and though few believed any of his tales, he remained very happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long. Again, we hear more about this, his family and his old age, if you read The Lord of the Rings, and that's where the ring, which is a great secret, right, becomes so important. But for now, he uses it just to hide when people come to visit that he doesn't want to see, right? So again, he is no longer respectable. He's lost his reputation. Okay, but what has he gained? He's an elf friend, the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed that way. And not all of the hobbits are no longer willing to talk to him, right? He still has the nieces and nephews on the Took side, right? He takes to writing poetry. And so for all that he has lost his reputation, it seems that he has gained something that at least makes him very happy, right? All of these new friends, all of the new adventures that he now writes about, and all of the old everyday things in his house, like the song of the kettle, right? To him is more musical than ever. So he doesn't mind, and that's a big difference, right? He was so concerned with his reputation. That sort of is part of what set him on the adventure, was wanting to be respected by the dwarves. Well, now he comes back and he's let go of that, and he doesn't mind. Right? He's gained something more important than that. One autumn evening, some years afterwards, Bilbo was sitting in his study writing his memoirs. He thought of calling them There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday, when there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf and a dwarf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. Come in," said Bilbo, and soon they were settled in chairs by the fire. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggins' waistcoat was more extensive and had real gold buttons, Bilbo also noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer, and his jeweled belt was of great magnificence. All right, so these are some visitors that he's very happy to see. Right? Just the very end here, we see Bilbo sitting there writing his memoirs, writing down the events of his life. And it seems that he is mostly focusing on this adventure. There and back again. A Hobbit's holiday, right? This is the thing of all that he's experienced in his life. This is the thing that he most wants to record and pass along for maybe those nieces and nephews, right? Who he loves so much. Maybe so that his neighbors finally understand what he's been through, or maybe just because, like for many people, writing is something that he enjoys, right? We know that he likes poems, and now he's writing memoirs, his experiences. Yeah, it's a little funny to see that his waistcoat is more extensive. I think that's a way of saying he's even fatter than he used to be. He's been eating well, and Belen's beard is several inches longer, right? Just like they wished him as they were parting, right? They would both, it seems, have had a good rest of their lives up to this point. And so he's happy to see his visitors. They exchange news. All right. The new master is of wiser kind. We saw that the old master perished. And very popular too, for of course he gets most of the credit for the present prosperity. They are making songs which say that in his day the rivers run with gold. And the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf. And why should they not prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar. So we end just where we began, Bilbo speaking to Gandalf, as Bilbo is smoking his pipe, it seems, and laughing. And he is told here, as we saw, Gandalf has appreciated Bilbo's hidden talents, all that was in him all along, and he's amazed at how it has come out. Part of the amazing thing that happened in this adventure, though, right, his adventure, his escapes, his luck, and we might add his return, his ability to come home and still enjoy life, right, after all that's happened. That's pretty amazing too. Well, all of those things, he says, were not managed by mere luck, right? Don't suppose they were mere luck just for your sole benefit, right? He really likes Mr. Baggins, but there is a wide world out there, right? So who else has benefited here from what Bilbo has done on his adventure? Well, as we saw, all of the peoples of the north are united and at peace. The forest of Mirkwood is going to become more peaceful now that Gandalf was able to drive out the necromancer with his wizard friends. Right? Beorn and his descendants are going to settle that area and keep it safe from goblins and wargs and trolls for a long time. And Bilbo's home as well. He is going to take care of it. He's going to be watched over by the elves. As we'll see, his adventures, as he writes them down, are going to become the story that we've been reading this whole time, wondering who's telling the story. It appears that at least part of it is Bilbo telling the story, right? The way that Tolkien talks about this, and I'm going to look at this in Exploring the Hobbit, that book by Corey Olsen, the Tolkien professor. He translates some of the runes that are around some editions of the book. Here's what they say. The title, The Hobbit, or There and Back Again, being the record of a year's journey made by Bilbo Baggins of Hobbiton, compiled from his memoirs by JRR Tolkien, and published by George Allen and Unwin Limited. So Tolkien describes himself as the person who compiled, who brought together all of the memoirs of Bilbo that he found, and presented them so that we could read them, right? So he collaborated, he worked together with Bilbo to write this story. That's what Tolkien wants us to think about here at the end. He's talking about Bilbo writing his memoirs, right? He wants us to understand it's not just luck, right? Who managed all of the adventures and escapes? In a way, you might say, well, Tolkien writing it, right? But it can't be just that, right? Because Bilbo was involved in them too. Bilbo's choices, Bilbo's courage, his wisdom, his friendship with the dwarves, and with people who, even when they weren't friendly towards him, right? He continued to trust in them. So I think it's important that Balin is here too, right? Sort of representing that element of the story. So all of that goes into what looks like luck. It seems to be the message here. And it doesn't benefit just Bilbo. It benefits, well, everyone, I think. If you've enjoyed the story, I hope it's benefited you too. So thank goodness for that. The subtitle of the book, right? As we're reminded, book's called The Hobbit, or There and Back Again, right? I really like the idea that this is in some way the true title to the book, right? Taken from Bilbo's memoirs, There and Back Again. The back again happens so briefly here at the end, but I've tried here. I hope that it's been helpful for you to kind of dig into those last couple chapters, see how they fit with the big, long adventure. And we've come to the end of our time. So I've got to say goodbye for tomorrow and for the rest of the summer. I hope that you read whatever you like. And if you like to write your own stories, that you spend some time doing that. I know I'll try to get back into writing as well. I hope you've enjoyed the 2 weeks of Hobbit Camp. Congratulations on reading this wonderful, this long book in such a short time. And if you're watching this later and reading at your own pace, that's great too. Much appreciated that you've spent this time with us. Yes, do feel free, continue to email, send questions to us, and we will be happy to respond by email. And your ideas and your participation are really important for us to continue to offer these camps in the future. So please do contact us through the website signumuniversity.org/academy and through the email camp@signumu.org. There's lots of great programming out there. More camps coming up. Look for those and enjoy your reading and everything else. Until next time, take care. Thanks again.